Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video, I will just talk about Azure Virtual Machine creation. Now, when you go to Azure, how do you create Azure Virtual Machine? What are the different options that you see when you're trying to create a virtual machine on Azure? Because when I was new to all this, I would wonder what these options mean, whether I should select this option or I should not select this option. So let's dive into the portal and just have a quick glance on the options that we see when we are trying to create a virtual machine. Now, first of all, this is an Azure portal. I logged into my portal. If you do not have an Azure account, I have another video on my channel. I'll just link it. You can go back to the Azure portal, create a free account, and then try playing around with the different services in Azure. So there are two options that you can use to create a resource in Azure. You can just select create a resource option. You can click on create a resource option, and whatever resource you want, you can select that particular resource. For example, a virtual machine, I can select create a virtual machine, and then it gives me all the options to create the virtual machine. And then there is other option. I can either search a virtual machine on the top, or if you have opened up recently, you would see it here. Click on virtual machines. I have two virtual machines already present. I can click and I can create a new virtual machine from here. Now, when you go back to the portal, when you try to create a virtual machine, these are the options that you see. First, you select the subscription. This is my subscription that I use for Azure. I have different resource groups. If you do not want an existing resource group or you do not have a resource group, you can click on create a new resource group and you can do it. So let's select a new resource group and name it test RG. Next option is to select the virtual machine name, the name of the machine that you want to use. Keep this in mind, you cannot change this name later. So this will be the name that you're going to use for this VM. I will use demo VM. Now, the other option is which region you want. As we all know, Azure has multiple regions. I will use West Europe for this demo. Next option is the availability option that you want. There are multiple availability, or in the other words, we call it high availability. There are multiple high availability options that you have in Azure. One of them is availability zone. Whether you want an availability zone. If you select an availability zone, you need to select which zone you want. Next is virtual machine scale set. Virtual machine scale set will dive in a different video, but virtual machine scale set is the I can say high availability option that Azure provides for infrastructure as a service. So if you have a virtual machine scale set and it is running low on a particular resource, based on the metrics that you've set, it will create a new node and it will create a new machine in that set. The other is availability set, which uses fault and tolerance domain, and depending on that, it will just create based on it. This is a separate section which we'll probably talk in some other video. I select no infrastructure redundancy required. Next is a security type. There are different security options. One is standard, which just has the basic level of security, where your hardware is encrypted, your disks are encrypted, but you have other two options also. One is trusted launch virtual machine. I again have an article on this and a video as well, where you can read more about trusted launch virtual machine. Now, what it does, it gives an option of secure boot along with the virtual trusted platform module that secures your machine from the usual attacks that we see. Another option that we have is confidential virtual machine, and in other words, it is called trusted launch confidential virtual machine. This was announced, I guess, last year, and it gives an added security on top of the standard one. Next option, where you select which image you want to use. You can choose from the bunch of images you have. You can select the Windows, Linux, Ubuntu, or probably a predefined or pre-installed image. For example, this one has a SQL Server 2019 installed on Windows Server 2019. I'll just select Ubuntu for now. Virtual machine architecture, whether you want AMD or Intel, I choose default, run with Azure Spot Discount. Now, what is Spot Discount? It is an option where, if your virtual machine is if you're just using it for test purpose, you're not really worried about its uptime or SLAs. You can just use a spot discount machine, which is way cheaper than the usual one, but it does not give you a guaranteed SLA. Then the size that we want, you can select on size, and depending on different size, your build. This is actually the main section where it defines how much you will build for this machine. I select B1S, which is the cheapest one. B series are the burstable series. It is cheaper than the usual one, but does not guarantee you the performance required for a high performance or high demand application. I choose B series because again it is a test VM. What kind of authentication you want, whether you want to use password or you want to use SSH public key. Now if it was Windows, I'll just have an option of selecting password. Since this is Linux, I have an option of password or SSH key. I can use username password, or I can just use an SSH public key. Now, if I have a public key available, I can use an existing public key. If I do not, I can just create a new one, generate a new one, which I will do in this case. I select any name that I want for my public key, and next is which inbound ports do I want. Please keep this in mind. These are the public inbound ports, which allows the external traffic to enter into my network. I can select which port I want. I can select port 22, which is SSH. Since this is Linux, you might or you might not want to enable public port. It again depends on what kind of login mechanism you're going to use. Do you want public IP to be enabled, or you do not want a public IP, you just want to keep a private IP, and then probably you can use Bastion, VPN, jump server, depending on what mechanism you want to use. I keep a public port SSH22 enabled. Next option takes me to the disk section, where I can select what kind of disk I want. Do I want premium? Do I want standard? In standard also I have SSD and HDD. Or if I want a locally redundant LRS, or I want zone redundant, which is ZRS. Again, locally redundant is cheaper because you just have 3 copies. Zone redundant, as the name suggests, your copies available across the zone, and it gives you higher SLA. But again, it is expensive than the local one. Similarly, premium and standard. Premium, as the name suggests, is a premium option which gives you high throughput, which gives you high IO, but is again expensive than the standard one. I'll just choose standard SSD. Next option is key management. Now, what is the key management? That again, when you're using any kind of data on Azure, you would want it to be encrypted. Now, Azure on its own encrypts the data on these disks, and there is an option whether you want platform managed key or you have your own key and you want to encrypt it using your own keys. I choose the default platform managed key. Now, if you want to add another data disks, you can just click on create a new disk. I can name it anything. Let's keep it default. If you want to create a disk from an existing snapshot or a blob or none, I'll just keep none for now. Again, you have an option of premium, standard, SSD, zone, local, and all that. I'll choose standard, choose 4. Okay, again the key management. Okay, go to next. Networking. This is the option which gives you, or which tells you how you want to manage the network. For example, which virtual network you want. this VM to be attached to, what subnet, what public IP, what network security group, which is the firewall as you call in your on-premises world. I can select an existing VNet. For example, I have VNets, or I can click and create a new VNet. I will select an existing one and I can choose the subnet I want. I can create any of subnet as well if I want, which I do not want right now. I can choose what network security group I want. If I do not want a security group at all, or just want basic or advanced will give you more options. I'll just keep default. Again, the public inbound ports, which we selected earlier. There is an option which gives, again, let's go back to disk. There is an option for disk also, delete with VM. If you are going to delete your virtual machine, which you might do sooner or later, do you want these disks to be deleted when you delete this virtual machine? This option was not there a long time ago, and a lot of customers would come back and say, I've deleted my virtual machine, but I'm still incurring the cost. Now, why are you incurring the cost? Because the disk associated with the virtual machine was not deleted. You still have those virtual machine disks in your subscription. Now, based on the feedback, Microsoft eventually came up with this option which lets you delete resources when you are deleting a virtual machine. Similarly, here also I have an option where I want to delete my public IP and NIC. NIC is network interface card, which will allow the network to, or this VM to have access to network and eventually have access to other resources as well. Next, go to management. Whether you want a managed identity, this is a separate section altogether. I'll probably create a video on this, what is managed identity. But in short, if I have to say it in a layman's term, you as a user, when you try to log into Azure, you use your email ID, which is your identity. What if this virtual machine has to access other resources? This virtual machine wants to do something, for example, an application on this virtual machine wants to access a SQL Pass instance. How does it do it? We can assign a managed identity. We can assign an identity to this machine, which then registers it as an application in my Azure Active Directory, and then we can have further stuff. You can choose whether you want AAD login enabled, which I do not want for now. I do not want this also. Next is enable shutdown, which is a very good option actually, because for example, assume this is a demo VM or this is just a test VM, which I'm using to test my application during my office hours, and I do not want my virtual machine to be running when I'm not working on it. I can set an auto shutdown option. Now, what it does, as you know, cloud is a pay-as-you-go option. In fact, most of the cloud are following pay-as-you-go option. You use a resource, you pay for it. You do not use a resource, you need not pay for it. So when you click on or when you shut down the VM, the compute charges that you saw in the size tab, the compute charges will stop, or you will stop incurring those compute charges at that particular time. So I choose enable shutdown. It's random time. You can choose whatever time you want. I choose my email ID if I want. I can choose backup. This I'll probably create a separate video because this is a different topic altogether, where we might want to talk about recovery services vault, different type of backup, retention, a lot of things. This is a separate video in altogether. Next, go to monitoring. Now you can enable alert rules, separate topic again, because now we talk about alert rule configuration, we talk about monitoring these rules, everything, probably different topic. But you have an option to select alert rules. You also have an option of boot diagnostic, which is very specific to this virtual machine, which is why I will just talk about boot diagnostic in this video. Now let's assume a scenario where you are working on a virtual machine and next day you log in, or you're trying to turn on your machine, or you're trying to log into your virtual machine, it's not working. Now, if it was an on-premises environment that you had, till now, or probably your laptop or your PC where you are trying to log in, you have access to that hardware. You have access to everything related to that machine. You can see what is happening. If it was VMware, Hyper-V, or any other hypervisor, you actually have a control on the hypervisor. You have a control on what is happening on this machine. But in case of Azure or any other cloud platform, you do not have control on the hypervisor layer or on the hardware that it is using in the backend. So if a machine is not up and running or you're not able to turn it on, how do you troubleshoot? This is where this boot diagnostic comes in. Now, using boot diagnostic, what it does, it logs the boot events in a particular storage account which you choose. You can use a custom storage account, you can use your managed storage account as well, or you want to disable also if you want. I would highly recommend enabling it. In fact, with the managed storage account bit, because it gives you more option, it gives you more logging. And in case your virtual machine doesn't come up or you're facing some issues in booting up, you can eventually check the boot diagnostic logs, which probably I'll just show you in a couple of minutes how you see it. You go to next. In advanced, you have your cloud init option. You probably want to run a custom script. You want an extensions to be enabled. Extension basically is a small application that you might want to run on a machine for a particular job. For example, you might have a snapshot extension that will create a backup. You might have an OMS extension that might help you with the monitoring. I do not want an extension, but if you want, you can just select an extension from a bunch of extensions that you want. There are third-party extensions, then there are Microsoft extensions as well. I do not want an extension for now. You have an option whether you want a dedicated host, you want to use reservations. I do not have a reservation group created. Whether you want PPG, proximity placement group, I have articles written on it in my blog. I do not want any of them, but this is really applicable if you are going with the production one. If you're just building it or if you're just testing it, no need, because again, all these options will incur additional charges. It is just for, I would say it enhances the performance, and it is purely business based. Next is tags. If you really want to tag your virtual machine, tags help you organize resources. Tags is highly recommended. Tag your resources. For example, let's assume I create a tag use case, and I'll just create a tag use case demo. Now this, eventually when I go and check my resources, I can just filter whatever resources have this tag, and I can check probably builds, or I can filter, I can run queries, I can do a lot of things. I click on review and create. It runs a final validation. It just verifies whatever options I selected on these tabs. Are these options right? If those options are not right, or if you're missing a mandatory option, it will give you a pop-up. It will give you a warning. You can rectify it and click on create. It creates. Now this is what I wanted to show. You remember we selected generate a new pair. We selected a public key. Now this is where it tells you this is the private key that you can download. You keep it secure somewhere, and when you want to log in, you can use this private key to log into your machine. I'll just save it to my desktop, downloads, and done. It goes in and does it. Quickly to show you, I created a virtual machine recently, and this is what boot diagnostic is. It actually tells me what is happening with this virtual machine. This is probably shut down, so it is giving me a login option, but it gives me the logs. Actually, it gives me all the logs. So if there is any issue with my virtual machine, this boot diagnostic really helps. So highly recommend enabling this boot diagnostic. Thank you, and if you have any questions, Post down in the comments. If you want me to create any topic, video on any topic, let me know and I'll go ahead and do it. Thank you. Have a good day.